Thank you, Corey. That was so inspirational and just very meaningful for our audience. Thank you again for speaking with us. I have seen you give a talk before and a couple of years ago, and just watching this now made me want to ask you a couple of questions. At that time, you weren't calling yourself an advocate for mental health, and now you're, outright branding yourself that way. Why is it important to you to be an advocate for mental health?
Well, that's actually that's a really poignant question, because the decision to identify as a certain thing empowers the voice behind it, right? And for a long time, not identifying that way keeps sort of the conversation about mental health in some ways down, right? Because I'm not owning it outright. And so the decision to own it more outright came very organically, in terms of, this is something that I believe strongly needs to be part of the larger conversation, part of the larger narrative. And as such, I need to loudly sort of proclaim myself as someone who feels that this is an important element of our cultural discourse right now. And so, for me, the idea that mental health is integral to our well-being as a human family and as our future is part and parcel with basically my outlook on where my purpose in life, and that I equate with speaking for these issues. Does that make sense? Was that too convoluted?
No, I think that makes perfect sense. And in fact, when I first heard you speak, your talk was billed as, your bravery to be able to talk about these issues. And that's one of the things that, of course, Love for Lawrence is trying to, help everyone have the bravery to speak about mental health. And so what do you think, kind of gave you that courage or that bravery? Is there something in the world of alpine mountaineering or others that, or how can people cultivate that bravery that it takes maybe initially to first be able to talk about it?
Well, again, I think that is my whole purpose is to offer the opportunity for people to see that you can be a number of different things. You can be successful in one area of your life, and you can have all sorts of mental health struggles in other areas of your life. They aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, they're tied together. You can be more than one thing at a time. Just because you struggle with maybe some mental health issues doesn't mean that you can't be wildly successful in your relationships, in your jobs. It does mean that those mental health hurdles might begin to impact those areas. So if you don't speak openly and honestly about it, that sort of shame, guilt, all of the negative emotions that come with that baggage. I mean, my baggage, I'll call it that. I don't want to use that term in a negative context, but we all come with our baggage, and that's good. That's what makes us whole. The opportunity to speak to those issues, address them, ultimately makes us more successful in every other aspect of our lives. I don't think there's anything necessarily that I've done through life that's given me any more or less courage to speak about it, other than the simple fact that I've gone through it. And when I see people and I encounter people who are obviously struggling in their own lives, that gives me a sense of purpose to speak more loudly about the struggles that I've been through, in order that I can create a platform for other people to speak courageously and openly about the struggles that they face. And again, the talk goes through all these, it interweaves these narratives of career and marriage and family and failure and success and these big adventures pitted against alcoholism and depression and bipolar disorder, anxiety, all of these things are tied together, right? And so I think that's what people need to understand, is that it's okay to be experiencing those struggles. You can still achieve highly. You can still be wildly successful. They don't need to be blockades. They can actually be stepping stones towards, your best self.
Thank you. That's really powerful. And I absolutely agree. I've been thinking today on Veterans Day about some of the parallels with veterans who train for a military mission and with elite athletes who train for various physical and mental achievements. And then maybe the challenges that ensue with each once that purpose or mission, has come to an end. So have you spoken with veterans groups in the past, or what has helped you cope with life between expeditions that might be useful for veterans who return from combat?
So it's whenever I address the issue of veterans and combat, I have to be really careful, because I hold such a high regard for that source of whether it's trauma or mental health struggles, right? That is a deeply powerful and courageous arena to go into willfully, and the results from combat on people and their mental well-being is profound. And so I want to just hold a place for that before I speak to what I do. And what I do is can be similar in some ways to a combat environment, in that you are wholly reliant on the people around you or your climbing partner. There are external forces at play that are unreliable and can impact you in a number of different ways, including killing you or almost killing you. But I don't want to say that what I do is nearly as important as the work that our armed forces do. So I just need to be clear about that. That said, I have spoken and worked with veterans in the past. There is an alignment between these big expeditions going out into the field, and that would be sort of equated to combat living, where it's in a heightened, high stimulus environment, where there's a reduction to basic survival, and you are forming deep bonds of trust with the people around you, and you're also under constant threat. That kind of stimulus, when experienced over prolonged periods of time, and potentially adding in near-death experiences or witnessing death around you, can elevate brain activity in a way to where you are almost constantly living within your sympathetic nervous system. You're in fight or flight nearly all the time. That causes adrenal fatigue, exhaustion, high anxiety, and the results of that are anxiety when you go home. And one of the ways that we deal with anxiety oftentimes is substance abuse, and depression. We go into these deep, dark depressions, and that's stuff that I can really relate to. That's stuff that I can speak to directly, because even though the source of the trauma or the source of that anxiety is different, the experience of trauma and anxiety in the brain and the chemical and neurological machinations of those things are identical. What happens to me when I come back is I go into these sort of dark places, these depressions, and I instantly crave that high stimulus environment. And I've gone deep into therapy, EMDR. That's one methodology that I found very, very useful. Also, I've worked with a lot of meditation, and that's something that, you know, one of the things I hear all the time is, I don't know how to meditate. I don't have time for meditation, you know, and it's like, the way I teach that is, okay, just follow one breath. Breathe in, follow it all the way through, and breathe out, follow it all the way out. That's one breath. That is meditation. You know how to meditate. Everybody does. That's an exercise I do with people all the time. So meditation, EMDR, I avoid substance, but that's not always possible for people right away. But if you notice that you're gravitating towards those coping mechanisms, that's something to be addressed in the therapy bucket, right? Yeah, I don't know. It's such a long answer. And I'm sorry for going on about it, but that is, you know, that's a whole world, and that's a whole process that I myself am still dealing with and trying to figure out the best methodology to cope with.
Well, I think those are all really useful techniques, and some of our viewers have submitted their own questions that kind of follow on some of these themes. They wanted to know, you know, since tonight we're talking about art therapy, if you've ever tried art or other creative therapy. They also wanted to know how your photography serves you potentially as a tool for, you know, that creative outlet.
Well, art therapy is, I would actually say that photography, as much as it is my career, has been a form of art therapy throughout my entire life, because it is a natural extension of my internal landscape. Even though I'm a journalist, I cannot extract the fact that I am also human, and I have necessary emotional responses to things. And that doesn't mean I sway my coverage to point in one direction. It just means that I am present with the emotions that I feel in the process of making images on certain topics. And that right there is essentially art therapy, right? Where you take an emotional response and you inject it in some way into a creative expression. Journalism, I try not to be too emotionally driven, but in terms of the broader question about art therapy, I would say that photography as an art form has been that to me. I also think that anything that requires some level of creativity, it doesn't have to be necessarily what we consider art. Building things, getting out and working with your hands, it has a meditative, and I don't want to be too woo-woo because sometimes that turns people off, and that's not what I'm trying to do. When I talk about meditation, I'm talking about pure presence. But when we work with our hands, so whether you're building something, you're painting something, you're writing, or even music, composition or photography, what it does is it narrows the scope of focus, and it gives the mind something to focus on that's immediate, and it makes us present. That's the presence that we're looking for, or that I'm looking for in any sort of therapy. Because in those moments of presence, we get a reprieve and a sort of a rest or a respite from that humming and that spinning that trauma and anxiety and resultant depression can have with it. And so, art therapy is, gosh, short of sounding too on board with it, I think art therapy is one of the things that can save the world. So
yeah, well, we agree. And there were a lot of questions submitted that have a lot to do with the time we're in, and just also related to isolation. So this question comes from a high school student named Teddy Schaefer, who would like to know how you face the challenge of quarantine and what you did to occupy yourself both physically and mentally.
Quarantine is such a good question, Teddy. It's like, this is one of the most challenging times that humans in modern history have gone through. And I want to state that with some emphasis, because we can't overstate what's happening to us right now. We're not victims, but this is just something that's happening, and we're all going through it together. So if you're feeling a certain way, please give that voice. Don't think that you're alone in that. We are all in this together. Myself at the beginning, I immediately I was like, oh, I'm gonna take this opportunity to write. I'm gonna interview my parents. I'm gonna do all this stuff. And I did some of it. And then I realized that I was forcing myself into action. And that can be good. But it can also create anxiety, as if to say that, oh, I'm not doing enough with the time that I have. We didn't ask for this time. Our lives have evolved without this sort of isolation, and it is an adjustment to all of us. We're not meant to be isolated as the humans that we are. We are not that species. We are meant to be with one another. So what I found again was a strong meditation practice, in which I would wake up every morning, and before I touched my phone, before I did anything other than go to the bathroom, I would meditate for 20 minutes. And that was my process. Then I would get up and make breakfast. See, what you're seeing here is I built a routine. After breakfast, I would then exercise. It didn't have to be for a long time, but it was at least a little bit of time, at least a half an hour, right? You'll notice that after 20 minutes of exercise, even if it's sit-ups and push-ups, whatever, simple, your brain actually shifts. And you'll start to take on a whole different sort of mindset about the day and the things that are happening around you. So what I did was I built a routine, and I followed that routine daily, and I didn't stray from it. And then when I had the opportunity, when quarantine started to lift in our area and we were able to go out more, I started to take those opportunities with precautions and with safety. But I tried to also reach out to people as much as I could, simply to connect. And I think Zoom has helped with that, FaceTime, simply seeing one another and allowing ourselves to interpret and understand facial expressions and things like that. That's very, very helpful.
Great. So this is similar. And this question came from one of our Lifesaver sponsors, Humana, who is interested in helping their members and communities have more mentally and physically healthy days. So they, report that studies have found social isolation and loneliness can have as negative of health consequences as obesity or smoking. And knowing that you've spent a lot of time in wilderness and you're also sensitive to mental health challenges, have you experienced negative effects from being socially isolated? And then, how can those who are feeling lonely or isolated become more resilient or connected during times like these?
I mean, the hard answer is yes. I've experienced that isolation. One of the biggest problems that I face in terms of my own struggles around mental health and mental wellness is I do isolate. So I've built my life. This is going to get a little bit into the weeds, and I'll try to make it short. I built my life to be isolated and chaotic. And that's because of some of, ADHD and my initial diagnosis of bipolar, they have inclinations in those directions, right? So as a child, my life was chaotic, and there was abuse and there was inescapable stress. And so I learned that's where I learned how to survive in those environments. When life around me is they're not healthy. I'm just stating my struggle with it and my path with it. So I'm very familiar with isolation, and I'm very familiar with chaos. And you can be in chaos in isolation too. I mean, they're not mutually exclusive. So what I would say is the way around that, again, is creating systems whereby you are forced to confront the decisions you're making. And so,
Sorry to interrupt. We had a minor blip in the recording just right then. And so I may have to have you just kind of start that thought over again, because I don't want you to keep going too far with the answer and not have that recorded, especially because this was from a sponsor. So
yeah.
I apologize. It was a very minor blip, but it was
How long was it?
it was like 2 sentences ago, basically.
Okay, that's fine.
So you can just start the thought and we can edit that.
Okay. So I was starting to say, I have a system. Is that where I was?
Yeah, you had mentioned like your history and
Yeah.
so it was like kind of wrapping up that thought.
Okay. So yeah, that's fine. So I'm very familiar with isolation, and I'm also very familiar with chaos, and those things can live separately, or they can actually live together as well. The way around that and the way towards resiliency that I found is to have a system by which I am forced to be radically honest with my decisions and myself. Am I making this decision that is going to cause more drama in my life? Am I making this decision to be isolated? And when I make decisions like that, when I can see that and observe it, I will actually vocalize out loud, I am choosing to be isolated right now. I can still make that choice, but what I've noticed, and there's plenty of research to support this, is when you force yourself to say it out loud, you take responsibility for it. It's a very minor little trick, right? Mm-hmm. I am choosing to engage in this situation, which may or may not be chaotic, right? Or which is going to be chaotic. When you vocalize that, and this works with literally anything. If if you feel bad about missing a phone call, right? And you have to, we all do this, and we make up a lie as to why we missed the phone call. When you do that, you don't have to say it to anybody but yourself. You're like, I am going to lie to this person about why I missed the phone call. When you start to do that, you start to take that radical, honest approach to life, you start to see, oh, I'm making different decisions, because I don't like saying I'm going to lie to somebody. I don't like saying to myself, I'm choosing to be isolated. Oftentimes, as soon as we start to take responsibility, we start to say, oh, wait, this is a choice. I can choose to engage. I don't have to be isolated. And that honesty and the resultant decisions, that is resilience. That points us in a more positive direction.
Yeah, I love that. It's naming it to own it, and
exactly.
So we had a couple of questions about travel and how you cope with travel. And I'd like to just add on to that, the last answer there, have you used that technique to help focus your work in where you're going next? And can you tell us a little bit about, where you will be traveling next, and also what you're choosing to pursue now going forward?
So right now, I mean, the short answer is yes, I use that technique all the time to help me be more focused, to help me take responsibility for my decisions. And to be clear, I make bad decisions all the time. I mean, it's, that is the nature of being human. We can strive for perfection all we want, and we're always going to fall short. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but those techniques of taking responsibility, I think, are really important. Travel's tough. Like, it absolutely is one of the hardest things that I do. And I've noticed as I've gotten older, the excitement that I used to feel around travel. I mean, I'm in a hotel room right now, right? The excitement that I used to feel around it has waned towards an excitement towards stasis. So anytime I can design my life to actually be at home for a longer period of time, I take that opportunity, because I find myself to be more productive, more creative, and healthier. Travel is an easy thing to do when we feel ill at ease, right? And for the longest time, I think I really used my job as a means to escape the sort of the cloud of mental health issues that I really needed to face down and tackle. Travel is a wonderful, amazing opportunity that some of us have. And all I'm advocating for is to do it mindfully. Don't just continue to jump to the next. One thing that quarantine and COVID has proven to us is that we actually don't need to be on the road all the time. The world functions quite well when we're not on the road all the time. I would love to be doing this presentation in front of everybody. I would love that interaction, but we're getting by, and we can do a lot of our work when we don't, without traveling. That said, I've chosen that, my next objectives in life are, they're going to be fewer, but larger. And so right now, in 2019, I went back to Everest to try to climb a new route, a route that's never been climbed before on the Northeast face with topo. And we didn't get to the top. And of course we took this year off, and next year we're going back. Now, my job as a professional athlete and as a photographer facilitates these experiences. So I've also chosen in this moment to make a film that uses that ascent on Everest to talk about family, mental health, addiction, trauma, abuse, and grief in the larger context. So the film that we're working on is it's about Everest and that climb, it's really about my dad passing away. And he is in the process of passing away right now. So, I've taken this opportunity to have a hard reset. I haven't been traveling as much, and that's given me an opportunity to focus strictly on training and the necessary processes that it takes to make a feature documentary. Those are my next big goals.
Wow. Well, we will be following you on your next expedition, and also with this film. It sounds like a great undertaking, and I know we're all going to be curious to watch, and also to just be thinking of you as you go through that experience with your dad.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, death and dying are it's something that we want it to be unique to us when it happens, and it happens to all of us. And then we realize that because it happens to all of us, it's not unique. I mean, our experience is unique, but it's a universal experience that most of us go through. And I don't think we have a lot of language to talk about it. I mean, we have books and we have all sorts of ideas about it, but I think there's something valuable about showing the process and talking about it, again, very openly. I mean, my whole career has been like, oh, that's shitty. Let's talk about it,
Yeah, I feel the same way about suicide, and being a survivor of a family member who has died by suicide. Same thing. We're not going to be ashamed of that, and we are just going to talk about it. And what I also do know is just how much grief teaches you empathy and the ability to be able to relate to and understand other people. So thank you so very much for sharing your story with us today, and your words of encouragement. And like I said, we'll be rooting you on, and thank you for all the work you do as a mental health advocate.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope that soon we can do this in person. I'm looking forward to that.
Me as well. Thanks again.
Yeah, take care.